Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of Punk and Rock. I'm Kevin, the host with the most. I apologize in advance. I feel like garbage today, but I'm going to power through this because we have a very exciting guest for the show today. He is the archivist for the Hawaii Punk Museum, among many other things. And I'm happy to welcome Mr. David Carr. Hello, David.
Yeah, hello.
Perfect. Stanley Kubrick face.
The whole thing.
Excellent. So, thanks for being on the program. We had been talking about this for a while, and then I took a week off to try to figure out Zoom, and I couldn't make it work, so we're doing it this way again. Hopefully, we won't have any issues, but it is what it is. How are you doing?
Pretty good. It's just the COVID world.
Yeah.
So basically, just a lot of. I only go out to food shop.
Yeah.
Once every 3 weeks, fully masked up.
Mm-hmm.
Although now I have some N95 masks.
Nice. So I've been rocking the filter inserts for a while, and
good.
A couple of weeks ago, they declared my little county in Tennessee as a CDC hotspot, so that's always exciting.
Terrible.
So I haven't been trying to do too much, but yeah, like you said, doing the groceries and whatnot. Anyway, let's talk about fun things. So, Dave, you have been involved in the Hawaii punk scene since the 70s, late 70s, right?
Yeah. So, pretty much, I think since like 4th grade, I knew about, or maybe earlier, because, well, put it this way, I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. And so my sisters, probably wouldn't want me to say this, but, 10 years older, 9 years older, my brother's 5 years older, and then there's me. And so my sisters put on, when they lived in Illinois, I guess, they put on concerts in the back. Oh God. Okay. Sorry. I'm getting a call, which never happens. Emergency. My sisters, when they lived in Illinois, I guess, put on Beatles concerts in the backyard using brooms as guitars, and they lip synced.
Cool.
So they knew about, when I was growing up, they knew about everything from rock, classic rock, Beatles and Stones, to Pink Floyd, to disco, to a lot of stuff. And then also, some early new wave and punk. And then, of course, my brother was in UH Lab School. And so this is where a lot of kind of early new wave and punk people were. So Rudy Trubit from the Squids was already playing music. And there's Sheldon Russell, Richard Mont, Matt Miller from Hat Makes the Man and other bands. And then I guess Peter Bond and Sean Thibodeau and all these other people. By the way, as we go along, it's like I'm inevitably going to leave tons of people out.
Right, of course, yeah.
Because I'm somehow, I guess maybe I'm seen as an archivist or somebody, if anyone even knows about me. But
that's what you get for making a website.
Yeah, it's inevitable that you leave a lot of people out, probably most people in your stories.
Right.
So you're doing these interviews, and I'm sure over time the stories will be told. And I was kind of thinking too, what about all the women, who, you mentioned Mari, and I guess you wanted to interview her maybe, and that would be cool.
Yeah.
And I could name a ton of them, and I guess, Raya, Tamara, Kathy Pudwell, Melissa Klum, Karen Kiefer, Flower Schneck, Paquita, Lori Psyche. You could
Yeah.
there are pictures of some of these people at my website. They're just photos with maybe a little cute blurb I did.
Right.
But at any rate, I guess getting back to so yeah, my brother was kind of friends with a lot of the people who, in their teens, this is again my subjective view of the punk scene as it formulated.
Sure.
So I'm on the east side of Oahu,
Hmm.
right? So we're talking about like town to Ainahaina to Hawaii Kai to Kailua to including downtown and all this. And so the public schools mostly, I guess, on that side. Um, and so people started getting into punk, but their earlier bands were, playing like Led Zeppelin and Leonard Skinner and Deep Purple and a lot of good stuff.
Right.
And then they sort of started to transition, and so you would see bands like I don't know. I have lists on my website, but like they just started getting influenced by new wave and punk.
Hmm.
And so you would see a show where they do some older kind of maybe, and they would just transition into doing stuff like Elvis Costello and Tom
Right.
Petty,
So
Kinks, you know.
recently, the group Taurus, who was also Kit from the Squids, right?
Yeah.
His early band, they just put up a bunch of stuff online of live
Oh,
shows that
good.
they were playing in Pearl City, like back in like I guess the late
Yeah.
'70s, where it would be like Elvis Costello, and then the Clash, and then a 999 track, and you're like, whoa, like
Right.
this
Right.
that was happening pretty early on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I was also looking through the Star Bulletin archives recently, and going back as far as like '78, you see a lot of AP like articles that were printed in the Star Bulletin talking about like the punk explosion in the UK and New York.
Yeah.
I've always wondered if like people back then, like in the late '70s, were seeing those things and then like kind of seeking them
Yeah.
out.
Definitely. It was like a different media landscape, but when the Sex Pistols toured the United States, there were like updates on CBS News and stuff occasionally
Right.
that, and if you were a kid into some of those things, um, then um, you would kind of know about them. And then when Sid Vicious died, that was actually made the news, so it
Right.
was breaking through, but there was no MTV, there was no internet, so um, but of course there were shows like even like Midnight Special. I remember,
Right.
uh, turning and they had I guess Rick Ocasek did a Midnight Special. He agreed to do it with the Cars, who were popular,
Mm.
but he said I get to choose the other bands, and he chose Suicide, who
Oh
never would
yeah.
have been on. And now I'm telling like very standard sort of punk.
Right.
People maybe have heard these, but um, it was interesting. And I watched it and I saw Suicide, and I was just a little kid, and I was like, who are these people? Like, this is stupid.
Yeah.
And then later, of course, I
Right.
realized, oh my God, Suicide rules. And this is
Yeah.
fantastic music. And then I got to see them actually in the
Whoa.
90s on one of their album tours, and it was really great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Um, yeah, they were really, really good. And just because they have that kind of, they're locked in with some of the drum machine stuff, but then there's a lot of improvisation too. And of
Right.
course, with the spoken word with the lead singer. Um, but yeah, that was really great. But there would be stuff like that on. And then, we were little kids or teenagers, and I started by the time I guess I was in like fourth grade. And then, so for me growing up, we had a lot of cassette tapes that we would give to each other. And so I would record, and my brother really had the better record collection. So he had all the Peter Bond used to work at House of Music. He gave us a
Mm.
demo of The Saints Eternally Yours. That
Mm.
just changed our lives, basically. So at
Right.
the same time, we loved Led Zeppelin, old Rolling Stones, old Beatles, and fruging and stuff, and just like, so you would call it garage rock now, I guess, somewhat, that
Right.
kind of feel, but also the Saints, who were also garage rock. And then my brother in his collection, he had Dead Boys, a lot of new wave, Blondie, the Ramones when they were putting out albums. We have those.
A lot of the Sire
Um,
stuff.
I guess so. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Major label punk, which was
Yeah.
right off the bat, which I don't know. I guess I remember Lance saying he wouldn't hesitate to sign to a major label. It wasn't a sellout,
Mm.
but he just didn't think they would pay him well, so that's why it was better to go the other route. And I
Right.
was just talking to Lefty Hooligan, who I'm friends with now from Maximum Rock and Roll. Sorry to be dropping names, but he was saying
Mm.
a lot of people uh, did make a lot of money. I don't know if Lance was one of those. I'm not trying to guilt trip anyone or anything like that.
Yeah.
I kind of doubt Lance was a
I don't think
rolling
he
in the
was well
dough.
off by any means, but
No,
when
no,
when J Church
wouldn't care if
finally
he
happened,
was.
right?
But
I think when J Church finally happened, they were really popular in the '90s.
they
Cringer
were.
was Cringer was too, on a
Cringer really,
smaller
because they
scale.
toured.
Yeah,
They
yeah, and a
toured,
lot
and
of
then
people knew
especially when they
them,
hooked up. Sorry, go ahead. Go
and
ahead.
a lot of people knew them in the Bay Area. And when they released
Yeah,
that 7-inch on Lookout Records, I think that's when a lot of people kind of, you
yeah,
know, caught wind of them, I guess. Um,
right.
but anyway, let's talk more about Hawaii. so,
Sure.
so you're growing up, and your brother, is introducing you to punk rock. You're kind of discovering it on your own. When did you decide to play music yourself?
When I first started playing, and this is probably good. I learned a lot of rock music, so I was like, by sixth grade, we had a band, and it was just acoustic guitars.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, I had a little hand-me-down, kind of crappy classical guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I learned on that. And then my parents said, okay, well, you do need a new one. Actually, my sister was dating one of the guys from this band called the Rock and Roll Road Show, who were pretty popular that would later be the Jazz Cellar or something. And
Okay.
he came in and he was like, play me something. And I brought out my guitar. He's like, first of all, you need a new guitar. And so we went, and my parents bought me a nice Yamaha folk guitar. It's right back there. You can
Oh,
probably see
nice,
it. Same
nice.
one. And so, yeah, I learned more on that. And then so we played this, we played, it's pretty funny. We played two songs called Rock and Roll, one by Led Zeppelin
Mhm.
and one by Sean Cassidy. So, yeah. And kind of, we were in sixth grade. It's all just music at that point.
Right,
I guess
right,
Sean Cassidy is actually kind of cool in a way. He's, all the that pop connections to like the Runaways and a lot of the stuff
right.
happening in the 70s. It's all overlaps, and you kind of
Sure.
get that mix when you look at a band like Red Cross. They understood all that, they
Right,
do
right.
all that kind of schlock. But so we played, and then by eighth grade, we were playing. I had an electric guitar, and we played the same Led Zeppelin song, but actually playing the riffs now instead of just strumming on the guitar.
Yeah.
And then we played Neil Young's "Hey Hey My," and we both times we won the talent show. So that was like
Awesome.
probably the biggest success. It's all been downhill from there, because I got into punk rock.
You played much better songs. You
Don't
played
do
much better
this.
songs than I did when I was
But
in
seriously,
high school.
so that was I started playing music, and then I think I was much more into the playing the hard rock stuff. So when I up to about 10th grade, like I started growing my hair out in eighth grade again. And so if you saw me, like the first time I went to see the Decline when they played it at the UH theater over there, which is another. There was this great guy named. Well, this is probably kind of bigoted, but everyone called him Frenchy. He had a French accent, but he didn't mind, I think. And he would have to deal with kids drinking alcohol in the theater, watching Song Remains the Same, and then
Yeah.
And some, so we used to actually impersonate him. And no, this is total bullshit. You're fucking up my business. You got to get out. It sounded a little bit more like trying for one. You get the idea.
I remember going to
and he was just a frantic guy. Who I later, when I went back to UH, I had some interesting conversations with him. But I don't know if I feel like I'm kind of narking on him. I think he was somewhat into fascism or something.
Okay.
But maybe that was just his old age. I don't know. But so anyway, Frenchie, the theater. When the first time I went to see the Decline, Penelope Spheris Decline, which was kind of because back then we really did not get a lot of shows here.
Yeah.
That was later in the mid 80s that started happening. So it was probably like 82 and maybe 83. No, I think must have been 81. But I had like hair down to my back. And I knew all the punk shit, probably, or not all. I didn't know the hardcore stuff, but I knew all the Saints, Ramones, and Sex Pistols and X-Ray Specs and earlier stuff. And to me, that was punk. And then I was like, I guess I'll check out this new stuff. To me, I thought punk's pretty much dead already. It was like 1980s. Punk is the 70s. So I was just into rock and roll more and new wave and stuff. So I had, I was pretty open-minded. But I remember some of the kids there were like, this is 1982. Can't you afford a haircut? And I was like, kind of got that peer pressure. So then I started to cut my hair. And of course it was just at first I just had like a mullet or something, it was just, it's short now. It's still long. And, but it was fun. Whatever, you go through different phases, right?
Sure.
My friend Barry told me, Barry from the Sharks and other bands and just my friend, commented like, yeah, how like, when people first get into punk, they wear cowboy boots or something just because they don't have any combat boots.
Right.
There's no Hot Topic, so you just try to.
Sure.
I'm gonna put boots on, like something, and I did that too. My brother had some old cowboy boots that we had worn to a Renaissance fair, and I was like, that'll be punk, just trying to do anything, and
whatever works, man.
Pretty nerdy. And then at some point, I think for maybe a year or so, I became somewhat cool, mostly because of who I was hanging out with. But I guess it's a mixed bag. But so yeah, I kind of started getting into it, and then at some point, I remember one night I went to a party and. I hope this doesn't get me fired from my job, but yeah, I used to drink alcohol. God, I feel like Brett Kavanaugh. I like a beer. I like a beer now and then. What a dick. But, everyone it's the teen thing to do. And certainly the punk rock thing to do.
Right. Well, what else are you going to do?
So I came home and I was just looking at my wall. And I just decided, I'm gonna just get more into newer stuff, and that was like maybe 10th grade. And so I had a lot of great posters of like Aerosmith, back when they were still a really awesome fucking cool band, and Black Sabbath and Yes, and all this kind of at the time was becoming, people wanted to distance themselves from that stuff.
Sure.
Other people were getting into cool metal like Iron Maiden, and I chose not to go that route. But of course, now I love those early Iron Maiden albums. Even some of the ones with the second singer, Run to the Hills and
Yeah. No.
demonic stuff.
I actually just
That's good stuff.
I actually just bought a
Okay, I'm
collection
not
of.
sure I can hear you.
Oh, can you not hear me?
Oh,
God damn it! Hold on.
I can't hear you,
Hold on.
which means I might have been cutting you off.
Can you hear me now? Oh crap.
I'll keep going though, if that's all right. Okay. So yeah, that's how kind of I took down all my posters, and I remember the next day my mom looked and she's like, "What happened? Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna. That's old now. I'm gonna get into new stuff." And so then I started to listen to some of the. I kind of immersed with my friends in at Kalani High School. So there was like, I guess I can name some of them because some of the people are gonna know themselves if maybe they watch this. But it
Can you
was
hear
like
me though?
I can't hear you.
You can or you can't.
Oh, this could be a problem.
It's okay. Hold on.
Shoot,
Input.
is your mic on?
Yeah, it is. Can you hear me now?
I really
Can you hear
can't
me now?
hear you. I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
So I'm
What
gonna
about
keep
now?
going until it becomes a problem. Is
Okay.
that okay?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Okay. All right. And I'll just try to look up at you for visual. Oh, great. No, it's just okay. Good. So
What? Okay.
right. So I was Kalani High School, and there were actually a lot of punks there. So actually, when I was in ninth grade, Robert Scott and some of the people knew the Squids, and they were. Robert Scott also had hair down to his back, and I pretty much couldn't talk to anyone. I was entering my just a shell forming around me phase, and I was really shy. So I was lucky to meet the punkers, who actually befriended me because I was weird and funny, and I would tell a lot of jokes, and so they liked me. Plus, I knew I would talk about Generation X, or I knew the early punk stuff, and so they were, oh, this guy knows some punk, and that counts. And they were all getting into. So it was like Mitzi went to the mainland and saw the Misfits and hung out with them, and so everyone found out about the Misfits, and Barry Oshiro and Derek Imose and Kim Masters and Heather Hahn and Ryan Miller and tons of other little kids that were into punk. And so there were shows, and so we started going to punk shows, and I was like, I better start a band. And so I would just go through my brother's records, and we did play like Sham 69, Gary Newman, REM, Dead Boys, and then we started adding tons of Jam covers, and we named ourselves Huck Melody and the Astro Chimps, just because this was like some joke that me and Rudy Trubit came up with when we were just joking around. And Huck was like the sound his cat would make when it was puking, and so we came up with Huck Melody, and we like chimps. So
I'm gonna test. Can you hear me now?
And then we changed it to The Start, because that ended with an arrow coming off of it. It's so mod, And so we were playing like a lot of kind of British English beat and some Joe Jackson, and we were sounding more mod, and it was all covers. And then we added in, we had one original song, two originals, one by the bass player, one by me. And the first original we did was Desperate for Action, which was a Vacuum song on the first tape. And then I quit that band, and I was like, I want to start one that is all original music. So when we started the Vacuum, and I got, because all the punks were hooking up across the island, or at least on the east side. So it was like, I guess punks from Kaiser, Kalani, some of the other schools, and then maybe Punahou a little bit. And So I knew Gardner Pope, and I'd been going to see the Sharks, um, and then so I asked him to play in a band, and then we got Frank Worrell, which was kind of a nice unexpected thing because again he knew all of the squids and I knew all the
Right.
squids, and especially Rudy Trubit. And Rudy and my brother were like best friends in high school, and they had many best friends, but they were pretty tight. Rudy was over at our house, so since I was a kid, I knew Rudy Trubit. We used to play soldiers, and then it graduated into Dungeons and Dragons. Um,
Are
and
you able to hear me now?
I
Can you hear me now?
I can't hear you, so I'm not going to be able to hear any questions.
Okay, just keep talking.
Okay, I'm sorry. The camera's on.
I'm pretty sure it's me.
Did you unplug your headphones?
I'm pretty sure it's me.
Did you unplug
And
your
I
headphones
see-
from your? Because that'll do it.
I
sometimes.
did.
Should I
I
just
did,
keep
and then I
going?
plugged them.
Okay.
Mhm.
So this is just going to be one long monologue. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
It's okay.
Okay, so I really think it might be the headphones, but I'm probably wrong. Okay, so yeah, Rudy Trubit, we used to come over to our house, and we would do things like, he was over there every weekend. Sean, another guitar player, Sean Thibodeau, just a lot of people from the bands were over there, and we would play with, what were they, SSPs, and then we would get really creative and burn things, and didn't kill any animals, nothing that terrible, no actual arson, but lighter fluid was involved in some of it, but that's as far as we went. And then we would also later there was a Dungeons and Dragons group, which included a lot of the early kind of musician crowd. Certainly Peter Bond from Hat Makes the Man was a great dungeon master, actually one of the best dungeon masters. My brother too was a good dungeon master, and I was the worst. They only let me do it a couple of times, and I totally botched it. But it was pretty. I think I killed off major characters with no story. We were just like, that doesn't count. And so yeah, so that was all the crowd, and I guess I was talking about Kalani High School. So I started seeing the Sharks, and then I had a reel-to-reel half-track recorder that I would do home studio stuff on.
Mhm.
And so I told the Sharks, I can record you guys. And they were like, oh, okay, let's do that. And we just put we could only have 2 inputs. So we put kind of one mic over by the drums on Davin. And this was at Brian Wall's house in Kailua. And we put another another mic in between the bass and guitar, I guess, amps. And then we recorded that, did an overdub bounce track for Barry's vocals, and that was it. So it didn't lose much in the recording, but that was fun, and I'm glad to have been the person who recorded that first Sharks demo. So I'm proud of that. And it sounds okay, and you can hear it, and it's fine. And then they recorded one at Punahou where it's way more kick-ass drum sound. It was in their studio over there, which was nice. So I'm glad they got that too. The first one was called Bad Day, and the second one was called Thriller, and they have samples of Michael Jackson's Thriller in there. And so they always had a sense of humor too. And I remember seeing the Sharks at many gigs. There were weird gigs at there was a courtyard at UH where they just set up a generator. And I think that one was SRO and the Sharks, and no one really knew except by invitation. So it was kind of this, if you traveled back in time, it would be one of the secret gigs you would go to that would be, wow, I'm here, It felt like that. It felt important and just like this is no one's doing this kind of feeling.
Right.
And of course, there were people that we didn't know about. Like when you look back at the Hawaii history, and there's all kinds of people into new wave and punk, and so I had never heard of, for example, the Flying Fucking A-heads. Never heard of them.
Yeah.
And later, I started hearing about them, and then I read about them in a magazine when I worked at Rough Trade and the warehouse over in Rough Trade Distribution in San Francisco, and then I got this hold of the 7-inch. You know, I was like, this is wow, noisy and weird from 1980.
Right. Yeah.
Didn't know about it, and they didn't know about anyone else either because I read an interview that said they were the only punk band in Hawaii. And I don't think they meant anything like fuck everyone else. They just literally didn't know about the stuff going on in town, you know, because they were in Pearl City. It's only a half-hour drive away, but yeah. So, are you going to draw out questions and put them up to the screen? Good idea. Okay, so yeah, so anyway, there were all these gigs, and then there started to be gigs at UH, and there would be gigs at, I forget the name of the hall, but there were several gigs at this one hall, and you would see like early Robert Scott bands, and then the band called the Rattles, and the Silence, and so there were some of these kind of indie rock bands. Okay, Facebook chat. Let me try that. I'm going to try to open my Facebook chat. Is that how it works? Okay. Weird that we were, okay, I can't see it right now. Hang on a sec. Slow computer. Okay, and I never use Facebook chat. So, hang on. Is it in Messenger or something, or what it? Okay. Sorry, I'm primitive here. I just opened Messenger. Okay, hang on a sec. What next? I opened Messenger. Anything else?
Nope.
No.
Okay.
Just give me a second. Let me see if there's any. Okay, how's that? Say something?
Yeah, do you see it?
No, I heard a beep, but I don't hear you. Oh, okay. You can see my other conversations or something? Hopefully not.
No.
Okay, wait. Let me, okay, sorry. Okay, I got you up, and now is there a, God. Okay, let me try this. Okay. Okay, hang on a sec. I'm in Safari browser. Should I try another browser? Sorry, everyone. Okay, just we'll hopefully be able to fix this.
All right.
Oh, hang on. Come back into video chat in Chrome. Okay. Let me try this. This should be Chrome related.
I'm just going to kick him off and hope that he figures out to come back.
Sorry, I don't store my passwords in this other browser. Hang on. Ugh, so slow.
Well, all right. So while we hope that David comes back, into this chat. Apologies. I probably should have told him that Chrome is the best way to do this. Yeah. So we're talking with David Carr, sort of. He's talking to himself, and it's a lot of fun. We'll just continue here and hope that he makes his way back. I'm going to put this up for now. And yeah. Holy fucking shit. I hope everybody can hear both of us. So he's making his Kubrick face again. All right, it's Dave. I think we're back. I hope. I'm going to ask Kathy with a K because she's actually paying attention.
Sorry. All right, so you fixed that. You fixed that.
I think I fixed it. I hope I fixed it long term. We'll just kind of
we'll see.
All right, so you left off talking about sort of starting the band, right?
Starting a band.
Right.
So yeah, there's all these gigs going on at UH. Yeah, and then so the Vacuum started playing at those, and we were. So I'm not going to be modest because not that much has been said about us since.
Right.
So if anyone's going to talk it up, it's going to be me. But I think people liked us a lot. Mm-hmm. We did have a lot of really good songs. So we put out a tape worth of original material. That was The Vacuum, Idle Forest. And, to be fair, I mean, people have told me I love The Vacuum. And so there is good feedback. I'm not trying to be bitter, but I'm just saying, I think over time, some of the maybe less hardcore type stuff gets lost in the more popular.
Yeah, I can see that.
So kind of, if there's any tinge of new wave or college rock or, and for us, we were a weird mix of, The Vacuum was a weird mix of anything from Violent Femmes to Psychedelic Furs to New Order and Joy Division. And it was this weird mix of American, and sometimes I sang with a British accent, which I wouldn't do now, but when you're a kid and back then, and it's like you're just writing songs and expressing yourself, and it's like, I mean, if British bands can sing with an American accent, fuck it. So it doesn't matter. Right. Like TSOL used to do that, right? Sing with a British accent. No one minded. Anyway.
So most of the shows there were at UH Ballroom. Is that the venue you're talking about?
Campus Center Ballroom. It was at another side, smaller venue. And I'm sure there's tons of people out there listening who know what the name of the hall was.
Is it the one next to Burger King?
Not Campus Center Ballroom, no.
No,
it was
like Coffee Line, maybe, or
it wasn't that far off campus. It was more you would go into. It was. I'm sorry, I can't remember geographically where it was. I only remember what it looked like inside the hall.
Sure.
But it was like a medium-sized hall, like a lecture hall.
Okay.
So there were seats, and they kind of went up, and there was a stage, and it was a nice place for a show. It was like any good mid-sized venue, and so there'd be tons of bands there. And the Vacuum did start to gain popularity. And by the time and then Frank was like, I got to quit the band because he's going to do Hat Makes a Man full time. And because there was like major label interest in Hat Makes a Man and things like that. Right. And then so that ended that phase of it. But and then I moved to LA with Gardner Pope. And so we said, let's do the Vacuum. and Cringer. But
Mhm.
before that happened, like the Vacuum released their demo, and we sold like 100 pretty much instantaneously, which back then was kind of unheard of.
Sure.
But we're selling it at Jelly's Records,
Yeah.
and so it just sold out. And then my dad, I had already moved to LA. He's like, I'm going to reprint these because they need more at Jelly's. And before he knew it, he printed 500 of them. And they all
Wow.
sold. So it was like, that's like platinum back then when there's no MTV, or by then there was MTV, I guess,
Right.
in 1985. But it was still a relatively small scene, but it somehow got word of mouth that there's like a real band, and maybe because Frank was in it too, and he was pretty popular. But also, I think because people liked the music, and so that was quite a success. And let's see. And we did keep the Vacuum going, but we only ever played one party.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't get gigs. We didn't really hook up into any
Right.
scene. Although people at Loyola Marymount, where I lived, I didn't go to school there, but I lived in Gardner's dorm room and annoyed the fuck out of them by living in their dorm room. But they were cool. But this other guy, Javier, they were very nice about it. And but eventually, like, you got to move out, and so I had to go. And I lived in Venice Beach, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah, right.
And then so I lived there for a while, and and then after me and Gardner went out, then Barry and Lance and Tarantino and Heather Hahn and the Kroll brothers, they were in MUG, I guess, back then, and then they had been in JIF, Just in Fun, and they would later start Dana Lynn, which became Chokeboard, which is still going,
right?
Off and on, but they became super popular in Europe, especially.
Yeah, for sure.
Like well known on TV, and
right.
I was telling me she'd be in Europe and she'd see subway posters, in the subways at Chokeboard. So they were kind of a well-known indie band.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, nice guys. It's like that to me. I mean, that's how I know them. But I think Chokeboard has a lot of videos on YouTube you can find. So we moved up to LA, and then me and Barry found our first apartment, and about 7 of us lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. And then they found another place a couple blocks away, which was on Arbor Vitae Street, which is later the name of a Cringer album or a J Church album. Cringer, I think. Maybe J Church, but that was them hearkening back to their roots when they first moved to LA. They made an album for their first house. So we would all walk back and forth between those two houses. If you look up on Google, you could find there's this one place where it's like the original houses of punk bands, and you can see that Arbor Vitae house is one of them.
Weird.
It was an apartment complex.
Can
we all
still hear me, Dave?
Huh?
You can still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just making sure that you can still hear me. Okay. All right.
So we all lived together, and and Cringer took off more. And Lance Hahn was very good at he back then it was all pen pal stuff.
Right.
And looking in Maximum Rock and Roll and Flipside and maybe other zines. And Lance Hahn knew how to network with other punks. And, he had pretty good politics. So he pretty much lived this thing where it was like an anarchy, DIY kind of thing. So he had pen pals and would write and put it in the envelope and put stamps on it and send it off and send cassettes and exchange. So he knew punks all over the world, basically, and they knew him. And he immediately started hooking up with LA punks, and not immediately, maybe took about a year, but he started getting shows in LA. And So they took off, and I was the drummer.
Mhm.
But after a while, I was like, I want to do the vacuum, and so this isn't happening, and I left and moved back to Hawaii to join the Wrong, which
Right.
was happening, which was my brother's band. And he already had a demo. It was him, Jim, and Rob Cribley, and then now it was two sets of brothers, the Carrs and the Cribleys. And it was really, really fun. And we basically, when we put out that first Wrong album, and I think I insisted on it to give myself a little credit that we should each have 4 songs on it. It only made sense because we were all good songwriters.
Mhm.
Really, maybe the first Wrong cassette is even better. It's all my brother's songs, so it's be a little biased. That was more pure punk 77 style, The Wrong, with all
Right.
good songs. And then, but on the other hand, the Wrong album, Ethel Merman Jism Spoon, not at all a weird name, was a little more quirky and had a lot of cool stuff in it.
Yeah.
And classic, you know, in my mind. And like
Right.
my brother says, this is his line. It's like The Wrong is always on a worldwide obscurity tour. It's like, you know, every time we get brought up somewhere, it's like, oh, we're continuing the worldwide obscurity tour.
It's funny. I recently saw a flyer for a Wrong show at the Gilman Street with Green Day. Or it was either Green Day or like Sweet Baby Jesus or something like that. Like,
yeah, they were all there.
Yeah.
That was funny because the thing about Gilman was, and you know, Cringer had played Gilman. We drove our truck. Ed drove his old Toyota pickup truck up there, and we broke down on the way, and that's a pretty cool story. But and we broke down in Firebow in Bakersfield, and that was fun. And that's a ton, because I know Bakersfield is so cool with the Bakersfield sound and a lot of good country music, and it's a rich historical place. So, but you know, the people we met were like one weird racist dude who was into punk and who was actually pretty nice but racist, and so we were just kind of like, okay. And then we met this other not racist dude who was in a band called Chaos, I think, who had a band called More Beer or something that was a hit at one point. Anyway, so that was our. So the point is, I had played at Gilman before, and kind of an early show with Frightwig and Anti-Scrunty Faction, which was like a pre-tribate band.
Okay.
So, you know, kind of early feminist. It was a feminist punk show, basically.
Right,
Cringer was, which was fine because certainly Lance was feminist, and you know, Cringer was like pretty much mostly vegan, like not all, but that would be Free Will was vegan, was the vegan band, and then anarchist stuff, and probably Lance was the most advanced politically back then because he went to a private school. Man, so it's okay. He would be laughing right now, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did get on each other's nerves, to be honest, back then, in a big way. But mostly it was very supportive, and we all really liked each other too. And then, so we did have a lot of fun. We played that first Gilman Street show. And then, yeah, The Wrong played at Gilman, you're right, many times. And that time
how did that happen? So you moved back to Hawaii, you got together with your brother,
right,
with The Wrong.
Yeah.
How did you end up back in the Bay Area?
Huh?
How did you end up back in the Bay Area?
So yeah, when I moved back to Hawaii, we played in The Wrong, and then I think Hypo Depression got back, or maybe that was after. Yeah, because okay, here's how kind of the timeline. I moved to LA, but I would always come back to Hawaii a lot, and even after I moved to San Francisco, I'd come back and pretty much stay the summers and then go back. And
sure.
So for a long time, I was still kind of here. And during that time, in the early days, we started, when the Sharks broke up, we started Hypo Depression.
Mm-hmm.
which is one of my favorite bands of all time. Um, and again, a little job at Lance. Sorry, I'm really, truly sorry he's not here anymore. But again, I think he'd be laughing. But I was like, that's Lance's best band. That's Hypodepression.
Mm-hmm.
But Lance was only the guitar player in that,
Yeah.
and so you really hear all this intricate guitar work,
Mm-hmm.
picking, and just excellent lead work, and so of course, later on with Cringer and J Church, there's a lot of really, really solid songwriting, and it's gets very political, and so he continues. I mean, obviously people love it, right? So more power to him, and it's good stuff. But yeah, so Hypodepression was fun, but I think Lance was always a little embarrassed to be in a gloom rock band, as I think we used to call it at one point. It's like, ugh, you don't want people to know about it or something. But
right.
No, he was happy to be playing with us, especially probably with Barry from the Sharks and with Gardner. And then out of that came Cringer. I was like, I'll kind of take credit, but maybe it wasn't all me. I said we should. I think Lance had already had Scarred for Life going, and he had joined them, and that was like Carrie was their drummer, and he was way better than me. Just super powerhouse shred, could bounce his sticks. Technically just a good hardcore drummer. Then I came in and did my little drumming hardcore style, and probably the best thing I did was on their first demo, which we recorded at Kamehameha High School. Lance engineered it, and because I didn't know what I was doing that much, and it sounded better. And later I tried to become a better drummer, and it sounded a little tighter.
Yeah, you started to overthink it, right?
Yeah, it was a little, but it was still, sometimes it was still pretty good. Other times it was not quite there. But so that Cringer started, and I was like, we were all really just quirky, weird, funny kids. It wasn't like, oh, come on, punk, I'll kick your ass or anything like that.
Right.
We weren't those people, we weren't. And I think later on, and this is kind of the divide between some of the early new wave or punk and hardcore, because hardcore did kind of get a little more like Rollins and
right.
Pit, and so it was more for the big dudes, and you're in the pit, and it's like, get out of here, you fucking, whatever, wimp or whatever. And,
well, it's interesting you bring that up.
Right? Too, but there were most people.
I'm sorry. It's interesting that you bring that up, right? Because we've had to deal with, people that were around during 3D recently, who, have given me specifically the you weren't there, and you're not punk, right? So,
okay.
And having me personally grown up in the hardcore era of Hawaii scene, and I never experienced that then, but it's interesting. My I don't know, interactions with some people who were around before that. Tend to have that sort of attitude, like, oh, you weren't a part of the real Hawaii punk scene.
I know.
Which is totally silly and ridiculous in every way.
I shouldn't worry about that.
I'm not worried about it.
Hey, I was there before any of them. No,
right.
That's not true.
For you,
Chris Owens and those guys were into punk from the earliest, and there were people into new wave and punk and whatever. And before that, like I think you mentioned, and on your sites, early Hawaii garage rock, back to the 60s, all kinds of stuff going on. So for me, I'm no kind of innovator, or maybe in some of the stuff I was kind of ground floor, but so were tons of other people. And it's like, for me now, when I look at music and I'm like, oh, fuck, I don't care about that. Oh, that sucks. Or, that's just me being jaded. But it's like, for the kids in the scene, whatever they're doing, it's totally new and fresh. And some of it is new, actually. We didn't do some of that stuff back then, or whatever other non-punk stuff they're into, or hip hop, or whatever, Swedish techno reggae, whatever the kids are into these days. I don't know. Hard chimp acid jazz pop. No, I don't. No, I would, to try and make up stupid genres, but
yeah,
um,
it's interesting that
it's
you
about
did
them,
it.
and they shouldn't care what fucking old people think about their music.
Right. I
Fuck
mean,
me. No.
I'm not young myself. I'm 45 now. I definitely feel 45 now.
Sure.
But anyway, so it's
I know
interesting that you said
so
that
it's like
because
it came a little bit after someone else. They're gonna hold it out
right.
against
Yeah,
you.
there was always the back in the day kids, like, or the back in the day adults, I should say, adults in quotation marks.
So I think we all do that to a certain degree. Because for
Yeah.
me, it's like when I got into the hardcore scene, I had already been hanging out with my brother, who was 5 years older, who was in the first kind of new wave and punk scene, and that was also cool. There'd be warehouse gigs. The bands were mostly cover bands, and then they started emerging into these original bands, like the Diamond Heads, like later the Squids, like Hat Makes the Man, like Obscene Routine. It was still a lot of covers, but they had a lot of originals. I saw them at the 50th State Fair. There was a band called Castration Anxiety that played at Andrews Amphitheater, and I believe that was Arnie Psyche. That was like 1979 or 80. Maybe I'm pushing it back, but so yeah, even for me, in some ways, I'm part of the latecomer scene, so I could be like, "Oh, you don't know what is happening." But as a kid, I did have the good fortune to have a brother who was willing to take me along, the annoying little brother, to cool shows. So I did get to see some of that. But it's just like, yeah, because you were older, you can't hold that against anyone. Anyway, I'm we've established there that's not a good one.
Well, the whole thing is silly. But anyway, so okay, the wrong happened. You're in the Bay Area or you're in LA, and you're coming back and forth. So this was around what, 85, 86, you said?
Yeah, so I was like, let's move to LA with the wrong, because that's where Flux Records was, and they were going to put our record out. Then Jim Cribley said, no, we need to move to San Francisco. And I was like, okay. So we did, and and then actually Cringer ended up moving, and so this is where a lot of the maximum rock and roll Bay Area stuff was. But the wrong never tapped into that. We weren't explicitly anarchist or punk, and we weren't shit workers at MRR. We weren't, I guess, and in a way, like, that's how Lance tapped into all that, because he was willing to do a lot of work for other people. Yeah. He volunteered at whatever that record store was called that they had.
Epicenter?
Epicenter, yeah, Records. Mm-hmm. So for me, I was just I think more a wise-ass little guy that, was into my own trips, kind of a bit more in my own head, whereas Lance had a wider view. And so they were able to connect more, whereas me, it was just writing songs. And so it's different approaches. But so we moved up to San Francisco. And so in LA, I had hooked up, actually because of Lance. Again, he hooked up with the nuclear weapons freeze, and we were both canvassers for that, which was involved in they had people who would lobby Congress, and it was the biggest peace group in the U.S. basically.
Yeah,
it was called STEAM. Didn't stand for anything. It was just Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy.
Okay.
And I later found out it was this guy who had started the first U.S. Labor Party. Now I'm into all kinds of labor history and Marxism and common shit that, either annoys people or they find interesting. But basically, it's working class stuff. That's It's not exotic and some highfalutin academic type stuff. It's just like, I like class struggle. I like revolution. I like Black Lives Matter. I like all kinds of stuff. And so that's my main thing now.
Yeah.
Then I was into it, but I kind of didn't get more in depth into it until I went back to school. I hate to say that because that's not the only path to getting into those things.
Right.
But for me, got me deeper into reading more history. I was a history major. And so I came back out on the other end while I was still in school and started hooking up with like kind of radical people, anarchist, communist type people, far left wing of the communist vision, right? Not North Korea or Stalin or that garbage, but we're talking, anything from Emma Goldman, Marx, Bakunin, kind of Paris Commune, Spanish Civil War, on and on, like the good stuff,
right.
the libertarian communism,
Sure.
which has nothing to do with American right-wing pro-capitalist libertarianism. But anyway, sorry for that aside. So this is all the kinds of stuff that came up, I guess, in my life. And certainly Lance was into a lot of the anarchist stuff. And you see it in his music, right?
Sure.
So we both worked for Sane Nuclear Weapons Freeze. And like they also did stuff like we canvassed against Contra Aid. Back in the 80s, Reagan was president. Everyone was afraid he was going to blow up the world.
Right.
He had all these death squads going in South America that would kill priests and nuns and civilians and peasants and union workers. And he backed those, and they called them freedom fighters. That was Reagan. So we were lobbying against, and it was all illegal too, by the way. It should have probably been, as Noam Chomsky says, every U.S. president should be hanging from the end of a noose if they upheld the international laws, but so it's just a nice mild way of putting it. But so we were into those kinds of things, and I'm not an America. Just a little bit about my politics. I'm not an America hater. I'm for the working class, and on the other hand, just because it's working class doesn't mean it's good. Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, okay, so let's talk about that then. So today, a friend of mine actually sent me a message. As he went to the post office today, he noticed that all of the hours had been changed at all of the local post offices. They've cut hours in half.
Yeah.
They are killing overtime for postal workers. And I mean, my own mailman today just left me a note telling me that he's retiring to become a realtor. So yeah, he's worked for USPS for 30 years, and he's like, yeah, I'm leaving. Like, and it's a really sad thing considering the type of people that the Postal Service employs. Like you have veterans, like you have people with disabilities, you have people who people of color, and I mean people that couldn't normally get a decent paying federal job anywhere else. Sure. And I'm waiting for the postal union to stand up for their workers. Yeah, and they haven't. Huh?
Right. And so there's all this effort to dismantle anything that's good, that's public, that's free. They've been doing it to public schools for years. People like Michelle Rhee and Trump now, and even Obama was pretty crappy on that, and Arne Duncan and all of his people. They privatized the New Orleans school system after Katrina. They said, "Oh, Katrina's the best thing that happened in New Orleans." It's people, and so it's Democrats and Republicans, and that's the scary thing. They're all neoliberal, right? Which maybe gets overused, but they want to dismantle, and it has to do, I guess, with kind of the phases that the general U.S. capitalist class finds itself in, and so, but generally, globally, austerity just means slashing public social infrastructure to privatize it to then funnel all the wealth up. Capitalism is a redistributionist system. It takes the value created by workers and funnels it up to a very small percent of owning class people. So glad I got to go on this rant about capitalism. Obviously, who doesn't love the post office? Is beloved, and whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or whatever, maybe even a Proud Boy, I don't know. But I'm not looking at you. No.
Malcolm X behind me says no.
They love the post office. Everyone loves the post office, and yet here we are about to maybe dismantle it. And it's been in the works for years. So the thing about the post office before was that the Congress and Senate passed this law where they were able to say, okay, the post office has to pay off all its pensions 70 years into the future.
Yeah.
No one does that.
Right.
You have to. And so then you look at their books and it's all, is in the red, is that the term, where, oh, you're in such debt, you're losing money. It's like, no, they're not. They're turning a profit. But you're making it look like they're failures so you can gut it and then privatize it and make money off of it.
Right. And isn't all of that accruing interest too, like the pension funds that they're having to pay off every year? Which, I mean, basically any profit that they made gets funneled into this, what they're having to pay off, right? And they're not able to pay it off at all. I mean, it's just impossible.
It's a scam way of trying to undermine it, and it's always kind of their tactic is to make it look like it's a failure. They did the same thing with public schools. The crisis of public education. There is no crisis.
Right.
Public schools perform extremely well. Teachers are extremely dedicated. They're the most beloved people in the, maybe except by the students sometimes because they have to go to school. I didn't like school, but I did. I was okay with most of my teachers, but so I don't want to romanticize them. But when it comes down to it, in the community, they're always like, "Oh, of course we support the teachers.
Sure.
Yes, we like them basically, and we like that there's free education." But then this crisis thing, as they say, it's like a manufactured crisis. So someone like Diane Ravitch, right? She writes about this. She used to be on the conservative side that was trying to gut public education, and then she switched. And she said, really, the only place you find failing public schools is where there's poverty, and it correlates to poverty. And the test scores generally across the board have been going up. Performance, graduation levels higher than ever. And if you compare it to the overall scores in European countries that are held up as the successes, they're mostly like more social democratic countries that fund their schools, and so the places where the test scores are bad correlate to Republican and right-wing and neoliberal Democrat policies that don't fund teachers and schools and infrastructure, and that's why kids go to school hungry. And so, again, thank you for...
Parents are having to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. They can't, they can't coddle their kids like middle-class white kids, white parents.
Yeah. And to be fair, and poverty is the most poor people in America are white. But that's just because there's more white people. So it's important to remember, there is this class aspect that to me is central. But then some people go too far and try to say anyone who talks about racial injustice or Black Lives Matter is just a neoliberal shill and they don't care about class. And that's total bullshit too, because right now we can see there's like all these uprisings led by Black people who are also working class for the most part, and they're like a vanguard in this instance of radical, and people say, oh, I don't like the violence, I don't like the broken windows or even the fires or the looting. And okay, it's unfortunate, but I just read a book called Dynamite, and it's about the history of class violence in the US. It doesn't romanticize it, but it points out that, sad as it is, it's the violence that got people's attention. And the unions would never have survived if they didn't act violently back against the police and the state, and they would have been wiped out. And so there would be no weekend, there would be no set hours and overtime pay if people didn't actually physically fight back.
Exactly.
It's like violence.
I think a lot of people don't understand that now.
Yeah.
People don't understand that the services that we do have, the things that we take for granted now, people actually had to fight for. Like,
That's what you brought up.
Pardon?
You brought this up. You said they're not fighting back now. And that's because it's like, maybe I'm not an expert on this, but there was a post-war boom in which there was kind of a compact between labor and management, or the capitalist class, the owning class. And so a big sector of the unionized workforce who was maybe disproportionately white. But then again, public sector unionism is perhaps disproportionately people of color. So it's important to preserve those unions for that reason too.
Right.
And attacks on unions are now also attacks on people of color. So it's a mixed bag. But at any rate, with things like housing, the post-war housing boom and things like that, 1945 to 73, there was this kind of era in which people could achieve the American dream. But with housing redlining and Black people segregated out of that deal, and housing happens to be one of the places where you accrue value and wealth to pass on, and Black people didn't get that, that's where you see them being ripped off, and the legacy of how much money people have in their bank accounts now.
Absolutely.
Stems from those policies, and it's still here today. It's still
absolutely. I lived in Chicago for 5 years before moving here, and Martin Luther King said the only city he could never integrate was Chicago, and it's true. I mean, you can literally walk, 4 blocks at a time, and you will end up in a different racially segregated neighborhood. And it's been like that. It's always been like that. And now that I live in the South, you always hear things like, on the other side of the tracks. When you go to a city in the South, you realize what that actually means. Like, there is a literal railroad track that separates rich, white, middle class, and Black people and people of color. Anyway, politics aside.
Right, rock, which has never been political ever.
Right. Yeah, never ever.
I love a lot of the non-political punk bands too.
Right.
I like the Ramones, and the guitar player, what's his name, Johnny, was a Republican, and he said you shouldn't be. If you're a punk, you should only be right wing or nothing at all.
Yeah. I watched this documentary, and I was just like, "Whoa, dude! Like, you need to calm the fuck down."
At the time, I guess a lot of people liked me as a nice guy and a fucking great guitar player. So, I don't listen to them as much because of that. But I love the Ramones, and I think Joey was maybe a little more left wing than that.
Yeah.
I remember being on seeing Screwdriver once on not at the show, but on YouTube. And there's all these racists up there, and they were talking about how they loved him. And so I was like, yes, the mixture of their Black influences in the blues, in the guitar and music. And then, of course, the influence of the Ramones and their fantastic Jewish lead singer, Joey Ramone. I love the mix. They're just trying to, grind him a little bit. Fuck racist assholes kind of thing.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left, and I did want to get into
how many minutes?
We have about 10 minutes. So I did want to get into No Place to Play, the compilation.
Sure.
And then I did want to talk about the Hawaii Punk Museum site. So let's start with No Place to Play. So it came out in 1989, which was about 5 years after the majority of those bands had disbanded.
Yeah.
And I recently sent you that article from the Star Bulletin where the guy gave a really awful review saying that there are more relevant bands that could have been on this compilation or whatever. But what was your impetus for putting it together?
I think that guy was just trying to show he knew about the scene, and some bands were left out. So as I say, I always feel bad about that. But the band that was left out, I couldn't track down their demo. That was The Effect. And I wasn't in touch with him, and I tried to, and I couldn't find him. And I guess I could have done a better job on that. So it is partly my fault. But later I the lead singer was John Bopp, and I saw him at Costco in Hawaii. I was like, oh, hey, I'm sorry we left your band out. And I guess they were upset at the time, but he was like, I don't care about that. You're good. It was all good. There was no hard feelings. So sometimes, things get blown out of proportion, and I did feel like, fuck, this article came out and it made me look like the villain, but now I just think it's funny.
Yeah.
And my mom and dad at the time, they were always interested in what I was doing. They're like, any publicity is good publicity. Don't worry. So
Right.
it's just funny. But yeah, so I was in Hawaii, I guess, for the summer, and I had worked at Jellies and been fired from Jellies, like most people. And but Norm was like, contacted me and said, yeah, we do want to put a final record out of No Place to Play. And so he said, I want you to produce it. And so we started contacting as many bands as we could, getting either their old reel-to-reel or whatever their masters were. And I think it's probably true that like I was on a lot of those bands, like Cringer, Hypo Depression, although I wasn't on that track of Hypo Depression. That was Rob Cribley on drums. The Vacuum. So yeah, I can see why people would think, oh, it's just some egomaniac. But I was just getting what I could together.
Right.
And there were some of the newer bands, and certainly like Fester and Wisdom Tree, and there was I forget exactly who was on it, but there's a lot of good stuff on it, and it was a pretty good overview, and I think people ended up really liking it. But so we would go into Fortunate Son Recording Studios, which was somewhere down in the kind of where the Dole Factory area of town, where those theaters are. And, so it's kind of an industrial place, and we go in and there's a studio in there, Fortunate Son, because the guy inherited money from his parents. And so that's what he named it. I don't think he was rich, but he had some money to work with. I don't know. But so it was a good studio. We recorded some of the bands new.
Okay.
And then those that didn't have new, that weren't still together, were able to just put their old tracks in there. So it does sound like a mix of sound quality too, but it came out pretty good. And we would stay up. We would go in there from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. to get the cheap recording time. And so yeah, that was pretty fun.
And so yeah. I do remember buying it. I had thought it had come out a lot earlier, and then just reading, I realized I probably bought it when it was released. I know I got it from Jellies.
Scrawling Wall was attached to it. Jellies, yeah.
Yeah, I got it from Jellies. I remember, Scrawling Wall was, I think it was bagged with a Scrawling Wall.
Yeah, they made a booklet for it.
Right.
Really nice.
Yeah. And
they put it on vinyl, which I was disappointed in, but it was still a nice package.
Yeah.
They put out a booklet for it, and that was cool.
Yeah. And so other than, the one review that we talked about, did it get sent out anywhere outside of Hawaii, or was it?
I don't know. I didn't really take care of that part. I just was like the producer. I was there at the sessions and stuff, and then I tracked down as much as I could of the other stuff. And so that was my role in it.
Okay. Was it Norm then that would have done the distribution, I guess, out of Jellies?
Yeah, Jellies, basically. And I don't know what else they did, so maybe you'll have other people who knew about it.
Yeah, because Mari was involved somehow. I was looking at the credits. Mari was involved somehow. There was Norm. Raul was part of it somehow. Maybe
Sean
the
Lopez, right?
Yeah.
Sean Lopez
right.
was around.
So yeah, I guess since we've been talking, I had assumed that you had the largest role in it, especially considering that when it was reviewed, you got name checked in the review. Right, exactly.
I'm used to it.
So then, okay, you were done playing music by that point. So were you just kind of like getting to the point where you wanted to?
No, I wasn't done playing music. I played music up until like through the 90s, and then got back together. But this is not in Hawaii. So yeah, I was kind of done in Hawaii. And we had this band called Creation Science that was like 2002 to 2006.
Okay.
Right until I left the Bay Area. That was Jim Cribley, Rob Cribley, and Ed Tarantino. So that's like.
Oh wow! Like a Hawaii crew, basically.
Yeah. And then before that, it was Yahweh's Mistake, which had
Yeah.
tons of different people in it. That was from 1992 to like 98, something like that. And we put out an album with Ed Tarantino, John Nelson of Boy Dog Pondering and Pagan Babies and Free Corporation now and stuff like that. Is on drums. He's just excellent. I mean, Rob Cribley is a super powerful, kick-ass, excellent drummer.
Mm-hmm.
Intricate too, and then John Nelson is just another great drummer. So I guess I've been lucky to play with really good drummers.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of them in the Hawaii scene. So, and I feel guilty now because I didn't really say much about all the great bands. But so I'll just say, like, can we maybe segue into the Punk Museum?
Sure, let's do it now.
Yeah.
How did you decide to get that started?
So I was at SF State. So I started my career at City College in San Francisco, where I got hooked in with a lot of anarchist shit and cool stuff. They had an anarchist library at City College where I would just go and sit all day and drink coffee and read free anarchist books. And you could take them out and borrow them and then bring them back. It was an honor system. And then I went to SF State, and I ended up as a history major, and I was getting my master's degree, and actually I was getting my bachelor's, and I took a class, Computers for Historians, and it was about the statistical package in history and all this stuff.
Sure.
And part of it was we had to make a website, and we used Dreamweaver and just the server from the campus. Mm-hmm. And so you offered to help fix but update the Hawaii Punk Museum, right? And so we'll think about that. And it looks super primitive and dumb, which is charming.
Kind of part of its charm, yeah.
Yeah.
Not the most user-friendly website, but
yeah, and so over the years so I started just by putting up a picture of TSOL, who I used to love, and I still like him. Mm-hmm. And then I made other pages, and then eventually I was like, why don't I start a Hawaii Punk Museum? And then I figured out how to put music files up on it, and then it just kept building from there. Mm-hmm. And I had all these cassettes, and I recorded them from my cassette player. I recorded some vinyl. I plugged it in. I used some program to record. And then it turned out they were all too slow by a little bit. Uh-huh. The nephews or cousins of someone in SRO told me this is a half step too slow. So I had to go back in and fix all those one by one, which I did. So now they're at least at the right speed. Maybe they could sound even better because they're low bit quality or whatever the term is. Maybe we could boost that up at some point.
Sure.
But it's all up there for people to hear, and it sounds okay for the most part, I think. But so I just kept building on it. And I was just building pages, and people would point out, you spelled this person's name wrong. Because I was just like, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I was just like, in between cramming for exams and then getting my master's degree, I would put up a page and then crash out, and it was like just a labor of love. I think that's the first cliche I've used all interview, but it was.
Project, if you will.
Oh, what project?
A passion project, if you will.
Oh, yeah. I'm creative.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, I don't know who uses that term.
So how long did it take you to sort of, is it an ongoing project or was it
still is.
a point where you decided, okay, I pretty much got it all there?
I got most of it up there. The last thing I put up was Broken Man, and they immediately were like, thanks so much. Oh, this is so cool. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, I love it, But that was on your site, I think, on the Hawaii Punk Present. We mentioned it. And we mentioned it. I have a Facebook for the Hawaii Punk Museum, too, but just to connect it to the page itself, to the website. And so I don't want to say anything about the technical side of it, but just that the last thing I put up there was Actually, I still have the political side of it, which you'll see it. I don't want to say who that is because, like, I write with a pen name, and it may or may not be me.
Okay.
I don't want to get fired, you know.
Uh-huh.
And I work at kind of a. I mean, it's a cool place. I love all my colleagues, but you know, there's a certain amount of danger by being critical
Right.
of everything under the sun. And I'm an anti-nationalist, so
Yeah.
so that can include things that happen here in Hawaii that I'm critical of, even though I'm supportive of them in a broader anti-colonialist way. I might say something that steps on people's toes.
Right.
I've even said that, but it doesn't matter. No one's who I know there's probably going to see this, and they wouldn't fire me anyway. But anyway, coming back to the punk stuff, the museum is not finished, and the last thing I put up on the Hawaii Punk Museum was the history overview that I did. It came out of an interview with Lefty Hooligan from MRR,
Right.
who he's like just a nice guy, but he's been at Maximum Rock and Roll since 1991. So he calls himself late hippie, early punk. He was one of those, you know, that's kind of how all the early punks were.
Yeah. Especially the Bay Area. The Bay Area scene was very much like that.
Yeah. There's a certain real charm to that.
Yeah.
So to me, that's my favorite part, is that late hippie, early. But, you know, even I was, by the time I had bands going, I was second wave punk. So I'm already included in these people that'll get like, oh, you weren't
right
part of the first, you know. But I can say, well, I was at the shows, whatever, when I was a kid. So I can still pull rank on you. No, I try not to. So yeah, that was the last thing I put up in the Hawaii Punk Museum that I remember was, it's a history. And actually, so you should go read the history. It's on the top page of the Hawaii Punk Museum, and it's just one of these links you click, and it'll take you to it. And it's me, again, it's subjective, but it mentions way more of the bands.
Right.
So at least there's that. And then on your page, you do see more of the stuff that's, like you say, 1980 to present. That's your page, right?
Yeah, we changed the name recently, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's fine. And that gets, I think, a lot more activity because the people who were in that, maybe there's still more of them in Hawaii, or for whatever reason, they're just more engaged and keeping.
I think they're younger too, maybe. There's a lot of younger people that were involved in the 90s scene than you know, people that are a little bit older than me, I guess.
Right.
So maybe you know, it's the generation that grew up with the internet, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, and I kind of wanted to talk to you about that too. So, like, when you call something the Hawaii Punk Museum, then do you intend to have that encompass the entire brevity of the scene, or do you?
Well, technically, it's the Hawaii 70s, 80s Punk Museum. That's the longer title for it. It's up there. So I figured that was kind of what I could contribute more to archiving.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the Hawaii Punk Museum, there's not, even though it's like, oh, and I know probably most people are actually, when I see people online, it's like the things, if they ever say anything about me, it's generally nice. So, you know, I don't mean to give this a view that I've somehow become the arch villain of this. That was just a couple little things. And like anyone else, I guess I've been a dick to people in real life or online. But, you know, I don't think too bad. But so it's mostly still people can either tolerate me or generally are very like excitedly, enthusiastically supportive. But, oh, Dave Carr, we love him, you know.
Sure.
And, in my own mind, at least.
I understand that sentiment. I've received similar.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think I'm the So anyway, so it was the 70s and 80s scene, which I thought I could kind of put up the material and pictures and music from, and like I had because in the early 80s, I visited Rudy Trubitt in San Francisco when he first moved up there. And I took the opportunity to look through his cassette collection, and he had all these Squids songs that weren't released. And so I taped them. And that's later in 2003, when I was graduating with my bachelor's, sitting in the computer lab at SF State, and I built this page. I was like, I could put all these Squid songs up there.
Mm-hmm.
And that became like Duganopolis Now. You know.
Right.
For people who don't know Dugan, he was he was like the arch villain of the Squids, and in a really funny way. You can hear it on that last track on that Duganopolis Now, where they say, anyone wants a dick suck, just go ask Dugan. You know, it's like all very vulgar and fun. And he comes up and he sings Pretty Vacant. And it's awful in a way, but it's so punk.
Right.
It's like really pretty cool. You know, it's awful in the right way. So yeah. But yeah, there's all these other moments in the scene, like Soda Pop's Club and UH gigs and the Puerto Rican Hall.
Yeah, Puerto Rican
My mom
Association.
was the president of the Puerto Rican Association for many different times. She was there when it first formed, and she wrote the definitive history on the Puerto Ricans in Hawaii. She has a PhD, I don't. And so we used the Puerto Rican Hall. We got to use it for gigs. Did you guys use it too?
Yeah. I went to at least one show at the Puerto Rican Association.
Yeah, I think it kept going after I left.
Well, it was SRO, so it had to have been pretty early on.
Yeah, they knew some of those people too, and I think was it Mama's Kitchen and Kalihis, and they knew some of those people. SRO did, and so it's like everyone's so connected. But I am going to take credit for getting the Puerto Rican Hall going. And then I think maybe we, like Lance and some of the AOK people, that sort of early second wave, again, it's all subjective, but we did kind of get the YWCA gigs going too. But, you know, there was gigs before and gigs after. So it's just a certain phase.
Well, by the time I started going to shows, I think maybe the first two shows that I went to there, it was still called the YWCA. And I think Mari was throwing the shows there at that point. She was promoting them. And then it became Coffee Line, and I think she was still promoting it, and she may have had something to do with Coffee Line, whatever the business was. I don't remember offhand.
Yeah.
But I played one of my first shows there with the band that I was in. And that was 92, maybe 93, 92. So, I mean, it was still going for a while.
And I think the scene kind of really exploded after I left. And that 90s scene included like the Devil Dog bands that came later. SRO was huge, right? And
they were still around.
Yeah.
Luau guys and groups like that started to pop up.
I mean, I remember buying a Power Pellets 7-inch, so I'd come back and say, "What's the new bands?" And I'd buy them and I'd listen to them, and I liked them.
Yeah.
And but I wasn't part of the scene necessarily anymore. And then at a certain point, I think it's just diminishing returns to be like, and maybe I'm just like not a fun enough person. I got really immersed in just being a school egghead type person, and I would just go to the library and stay in there for 12 hours and read and take notes and then go home. When I was in San Francisco, that was kind of became my life, and I loved it.
Right.
But I was meeting, like, I was doing other kind of punk things, like meeting up with anarchists and communists, and we held a fair strike. We put on, it wasn't just us, but all these other Bay Area labor people, and we put on a fair strike because they were raising the bus fare. It was only by a quarter, but that was a hell of a lot if you added it up.
A lot of people, sure.
So instead of like boycotting, we said, why doesn't everyone just ride for free? I mean, that's pretty punk, you know, in a way.
Right.
everyone did ride for free, and the bus drivers refused to collect the fare, and it lasted a day and a little bit beyond that in smaller ways for a couple of weeks. But it was amazing to see everyone just, and we worked with the day laborers, so like people from South America, and we put out stuff in Korean and Spanish, and like all this people on a mission, and it was just going off, and you'd see busloads of people getting on for free,
Right.
and then riding, and it was like, this is our demand, that you don't, you know, if anything, make the huge corporations pay for their workers getting to work, or
Absolutely.
or beyond that, like make everything free, you know,
Mhm.
and wage labor.
I mean, I like to tell people that, and you know, it kind of gets thrown around a lot lately, but you know, punk rock saved my life, right? I mean, if I hadn't been involved in the music scene, I wouldn't have the moral compass that I have now, or you know, the political, you know, background that I have, or you know, interest.
Yeah.
And I think you know that was the case for a lot of people, especially in the '90s and the early '80s. You know, I think that when I was going to shows in the '90s, that's when you started to see a lot of, you know, people starting, you know, record distribution, you know, at shows. Fanzines became like a huge thing. You know, we had Riot Girl. You know, like,
did you do fanzines? And
I personally did not do fanzines. I promoted shows. That was kind of my contribution to it, I guess. And that's another thing. I mean, I used what I learned promoting shows back then to do everything that I've done since.
To kind of know how to network with people and connect with other people and talk to them.
I don't know that I'm very good at that, but you know, at least the ideation of things. You know what I mean? It's like
doing projects.
Yeah, and not thinking twice about it. You know, just doing it because it hasn't been done, and not really caring what everybody else thinks about it. And to me, like, that's something that's never going to go away. Like that's an attitude I'm always going to have, and I won't apologize for it. You know.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of the kind of nihilistic punk of the Sex Pistols and Johnny Thunders and the Ramones, it was all like, you know, just play super fast, cool music and be weird and just fuck everything. And part of it was like, fuck the hippies and fuck the World War II generation, all this stuff they're trying to put on us, or what, you know, that was, I know enough about it.
Yeah.
I wasn't a pioneer or anything in any of that, but I knew about it and I saw it coming up, and I later came to read more about it and understand it a little more. And, you know, that's fine. And I still love a lot of that stuff, and Richard Hell and the Voidoids, or Specs or whatever, Susie, a lot of the goth and death rock. But, you know, when you take it and then you just say, I'm a Republican or I'm a Nazi and I'm still punk, it's like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
You're for authority. You're for the police state. You're for clamping down on the vulnerable. And you think that's funny? You know, get the fuck out of here. It's like you have to chase people like that out of the scene.
Right.
So it's like the Proud Boys now, and unfortunately they're in Hawaii, this douchebag Nick Oakes.
Right.
Fuck people. And chase them out of your scene if you see them. You know, that's my advice.
Yeah.
And so, because the Proud Boys say, we accept anyone of any color. And it's like, oh, you think you got to be white to be a fascist? You know, what about Pinochet, who you guys idolized for throwing people out of helicopters? Who are they throwing out of helicopters? Women, kids, union leaders, priests, anyone who was a dissident to their fascist regime in Chile in 1973. Right? And I'll try to wrap it up here, but I just wanted to say something about, you know, back then we had to deal with fascist skinheads too. And we, you're breaking up there, but.
Sorry.
Can you still see me?
Yeah.
And we did. So, you know, I was a loudmouth and I told off some of the main skinheads, and then they were all going to supposedly kill me or beat me up. And, you know, I'm very much a wimp. I can't fight. But a lot of the people in the scene were like, we'll fight. And I was like, I'll fight. You know, if they come at us, I'll have my guitar on stage and yeah, I'll fight. it never came down to that. And I don't think they really wanted to, but it was still like, guys, you're listening to Screwdriver, you're wearing swastikas, you think it's funny, and it's not. And back in the 70s, they had to deal with that. That's why they had Rock Against Racism. That's why in stuff in San Francisco, they had to chase the skinheads out of that park up on 8th Street. And they did it physically, and they won. So, and now we've got the Proud Boys who say, oh, it's about free speech, and that's why we're going in and beating up leftists and, holding these rallies that we say we don't want immigrants here, and we say we don't believe in women's rights, and they should be in the kitchen, and we're traditionalists, and we love Trump, and they wave the American flag. And then it's like, who do the Proud Boys organize these things with? The KKK, Sons of Odin, Rise Above. You could name 20 other white nationalists, and it's like, oh, well, we're not like that. We just fight alongside them and have their backs and support them and hold these massive rallies where people get run over and killed. But other than that, we're just punks.
Yeah.
We just like to drink. It's like,
we like to go to the dead Kennedys and get drunk and
like, don't come around us, Yeah. I'm not even in the scene anymore, so they can come after me. I doubt they would.
But I think it is a good message for Hawaii, right? I mean, Hawaii is a place, and I think that, we're both very fortunate to have grown up there. I mean, everybody who's ever grown up there is fortunate to grow up there. But, I mean, we come from a place where there's so much cultural diversity, there's so much ethnic diversity. To have anything like that in a scene in Hawaii just seems like foreign and ridiculous, and I can't imagine anything like that actually taking hold there. But to, like you say, to see a politician now, repping for Proud Boys in Hawaii, like that just, like that's crazy to me. And I would hope that that would spark some sort of like rebellion against that amongst at least Hawaii's underground music scene. And I haven't been a part of it for a long time, so I mean I can't really tell kids what to do, but like I mean, it just makes sense to me. Like if
generally I think you're right. Like they don't get much traction here as far as the racist stuff, so they have to play up that, oh, we're just a bunch of drinking nice guys.
Right.
Look, we've got people of color, and it's like, yeah, and they're fascists too.
Right.
And overall, you're part of a bigger white nationalist movement. Even if you are not white, that's what you're doing. So, they should be called out. And but we're lucky, like you say, because we lucky you live Hawaii. There's another cliche. Because it's such a like. I just posted a bunch of pictures. Maybe I'll post them to your site too. And it's like, oh, it's all like Asian and Filipino and people, and there's a couple white people in there, and it's not like we went and set about doing that, but that's just who was around, and that's just was our scene, and so in a way, that's cool, and people have written about that. That's one of the reasons why Hawaii is way more democratic. That's one of the reasons why it's way more union friendly, and it's one of the highest union density states. Because white nationalism never did take off here like it did in a lot of the other places in the U.S.
Right.
And so, and this is from a Gerald Horne book, Fighting in Paradise. And it turns out a lot of the people in Hawaii were like, even if they're from Japan or wherever, they were communists back then, organizing the unions. And so it's pretty interesting. But anyway, maybe that's our time. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, we've spent an hour and a half chatting, and I appreciate you being on the show, and I think it is a good time to wrap it up, and we appreciate everybody.
Thank you for letting me say all this political stuff. I didn't know where this was going to go, but that's like what I'm about.
It's all about just talking story. There's no interview questions involved.
Okay.
But I appreciate it, Dave. Thanks for taking the time, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right, take care.
See you. Bye.